The Whitaker family stood as a symbol of the American dream, their influence etched into the skyline of New York City. Their empire wasn't just about construction, it was about legacy, ambition, and vision. At the helm of this dynasty was Charles Whitaker, a man whose name carried weight in boardrooms and cocktail parties alike. He was a master of turning challenges into opportunities, a skill that had transformed a modest family business into a titan of industry. Charles's passion for his work was unrivaled, but it came with a price. His unwavering drive for excellence set the bar impossibly high for those around him. While the world marveled at the Whitaker skyscrapers that pierced the clouds, the family itself lived under the shadow of Charles's relentless expectations. James Whitaker, Charles's eldest son, bore the heaviest burden. At 32, James was his father's mirror image in many ways, ambitious, disciplined, and razor-sharp. From a young age, he had been groomed to take over the family empire, his path mapped out with precision. But the weight of legacy was a double-edged sword. While it fueled James's ambition, it also left him grappling with self-doubt and the fear of failure. The Whitaker estate was a sprawling mansion nestled in the hills of upstate New York. Its manicured gardens and grand facade were as much a statement of power as the skyscrapers Charles had built. On a crisp fall morning, the family gathered in the sunlit dining room, a space that was both opulent and intimidating. Charles sat at the head of the table, his piercing eyes scanning the faces of his family. James sat to his right, impeccably dressed and exuding calm confidence, or at least the appearance of it. To Charles's left was his younger son, Andrew, the free-spirited and unpredictable sibling who often found himself at odds with the family's expectations. Across from them sat Elizabeth, Charles's wife, whose quiet grace held the family together even in its most fractious moments. "I've scheduled a meeting with the board next week," Charles announced, his voice commanding the room. "James, I expect you to present our new expansion strategy. This will be your chance to prove that you're ready to take the lead." James nodded, his expression stoic. "I've been working on it, Dad. It'll be ready." Andrew smirked, leaning back in his chair. "No pressure, right? Just the future of the empire hanging in the balance." Charles shot him a look. "Andrew, if you spent half as much time on meaningful work as you do on sarcasm, you might actually contribute to this family." Elizabeth intervened with a soothing smile. "Charles, let's not turn breakfast into a board meeting. James has it under control and Andrew, well, he has his own path." Charles sighed but said no more, his focus returning to James. "Don't let me down." After breakfast, James retreated to his office, a sleek, modern space filled with architectural models and blueprints. He stared at the expansion proposal on his desk, the numbers blurring together as doubts crept into his mind. "Need a break?" Andrew's voice broke the silence as he strolled into the room, a coffee cup in hand. James sighed. "I don't have time for a break. Dad's expecting perfection." Andrew perched on the edge of the desk, his casual demeanor a stark contrast to James's tension. "You know, sometimes I wonder why you bother. You're chasing Dad's approval like it's the Holy Grail." James shot him a glare. "Not everyone gets to live without consequences, Andrew. Some of us have responsibilities." Andrew raised his hands in mock surrender. "Fair enough. Just don't forget to breathe while you're carrying the weight of the world." Meanwhile, in another corner of the estate, Charles sat in his private study, reviewing financial reports. Elizabeth entered quietly, her presence a calming influence. "You're pushing him too hard," she said softly, taking a seat across from him. Charles didn't look up. "James is capable of greatness. I'm not pushing him. I'm preparing him." Elizabeth frowned. "But at what cost? He's your son, not just your successor. Don't forget that." For a moment, Charles's hardened expression softened. "I just want him to be ready. The world won't go easy on him, Elizabeth. If he's going to lead this family, he needs to be stronger than I ever was." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, James stood on the balcony overlooking the estate's expansive grounds. The cool breeze carried with it a mix of anticipation and dread. He thought about the upcoming board meeting, the expectations weighing on his shoulders, and the unspoken competition between him and his brother. Andrew joined him, a rare seriousness in his tone. "You'll do fine, James. Dad may not say it, but he's proud of you." James glanced at him, surprised by the sincerity. "Thanks, Andrew." As they stood in silence, neither of them could have known that the events about to unfold would test their family in ways they never imagined. The week leading up to the board meeting was a whirlwind of preparation. James threw himself into his work, spending long hours in his office fine-tuning the expansion proposal. His days blurred together in a haze of spreadsheets, projections, and late-night strategy calls. He was determined to deliver a presentation that would not only impress his father but solidify his position as the future leader of the Whitaker empire. But as James prepared for his moment in the spotlight, forces outside the Whitaker estate were already in motion. Forces that would soon shake the very foundations of their family. On the morning of the meeting, James woke early, his nerves on edge. The sleek Whitaker corporate headquarters loomed in the heart of Manhattan, its glass facade gleaming in the sunlight. As he rode the elevator to the top floor, he rehearsed his opening lines under his breath, determined to make every word count. When the boardroom doors opened, Charles greeted him with a curt nod. The room was filled with the company's most powerful executives, their sharp suits and steely gazes a reminder of the stakes at hand. James took his place at the head of the table, his laptop connected to the massive screen behind him. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. "I'm excited to share our vision for the next phase of Whitaker Construction's growth." As James outlined the proposal, highlighting key markets and innovative strategies, he felt a surge of confidence. The data was solid, the projections promising. By the time he finished, the room was quiet, the weight of his presentation hanging in the air. Charles broke the silence, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, James. That was thorough." James's heart sank at the lukewarm response. "Do you have any concerns?" Before Charles could respond, one of the board members, a sharp-eyed man named Richard Clay, spoke up. "Your numbers are impressive, but there's a potential issue with the zoning regulations in the Chicago market. How do you plan to address that?" James hesitated. He had anticipated questions about profitability and timelines, but zoning regulations hadn't been flagged in his analysis. "I'll look into it and provide a detailed report," he said, his tone measured. Clay raised an eyebrow. "We'll need answers sooner rather than later. These kinds of oversights can derail entire projects." Charles's gaze hardened. "James, I expect you to address this immediately. We can't afford mistakes at this level." The meeting ended on a tense note, and as the board members filed out, James slumped in his chair, frustration gnawing at him. Back at the estate that evening, Andrew found James in the study, nursing a glass of scotch and staring at his laptop. "Rough day?" Andrew asked, sitting across from him. James nodded. "I spent weeks preparing for that meeting, and all Dad could focus on was what I missed." Andrew shrugged. "You know how he is. Nothing's ever good enough." James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not just him. It's the pressure, the constant feeling that one mistake could ruin everything." Andrew leaned forward, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "Then maybe it's time you stop living for his approval. Do this for yourself, James. Not for Dad. Not for the board. Just for you." James considered his brother's words, but before he could respond, their conversation was interrupted by Elizabeth. "Boys," she said, her voice tinged with concern. "Your father just got a call from the legal team. There's been a leak." The next morning, the family gathered in Charles's private office, the air thick with tension. "The details of our Chicago expansion have been leaked to the press," Charles said, his voice cold. "Zoning issues, market vulnerabilities, everything Clay brought up yesterday. This isn't a coincidence." James felt a cold sweat forming. "Do we know who's responsible?" Charles's jaw tightened. "Not yet. But I intend to find out. Andrew crossed his arms, his tone skeptical. Could it have been someone in the company? A competitor? Charles's gaze swept over his sons. It doesn't matter who it was. What matters is that we contain this before it damages our reputation. As the Whitakers scrambled to address the leak, another unexpected development emerged. A whistleblower from within Whitaker Construction came forward with allegations of unethical practices in one of their subsidiary projects. The news spread like wildfire, threatening to overshadow everything James and Charles had worked to build. "Dad, we need to release a statement," James said, pacing the office as the family convened once again. "If we stay silent, it'll look like we have something to hide." Charles shook his head. "No, we don't make a move until we have all the facts. Releasing a statement now could backfire." "But what if it's true?" Andrew asked, his voice cutting through the tension. Charles's glare was ice-cold. "It's not, and I won't have my name dragged through the mud over baseless accusations." As the week unfolded, James found himself juggling the fallout from the leak and the pressure of proving himself to his father. But just when he thought things couldn't get worse, a shocking revelation came to light, one that would change everything. An anonymous tip sent to the Whitakers' legal team revealed a paper trail linking the company to questionable dealings in their Chicago operations. The name on the documents was one James recognized immediately: Richard Clay. The revelation of Richard Clay's name on the leaked documents sent shockwaves through the Whitaker estate. Charles Whitaker's fury was palpable, the kind of rage that left no room for discussion. His eldest son, James, sat in stunned silence as the pieces of the puzzle began to click into place. Clay, a longtime member of the Whitaker Construction Board, had always been a respected figure within the company. But now, his involvement in the scandal was undeniable. "That snake," Charles growled, pacing his private study. "He's been on the board for years, and now this? Betrayal from the inside. Unbelievable." James, still reeling from the discovery, spoke cautiously. "Dad, we need to handle this carefully. If we go after him too aggressively without proof, it could blow up in our faces." Charles shot him a glare. "Proof? His name is all over these documents." "That's enough." Elizabeth, ever the voice of reason, placed a calming hand on her husband's arm. "Charles, James is right. If this becomes public, we'll need more than accusations to defend the company's reputation." Andrew, leaning against the doorframe, couldn't resist a quip. "Well, I guess this explains why Clay was so quick to point out problems in James's proposal." Classic deflection. James's jaw tightened. "This isn't a joke, Andrew. If Clay's involved in unethical practices, it could drag the entire company down with him." Andrew raised his hands in mock surrender. "I'm just saying it's convenient timing. What are we going to do about it?" Charles's voice was firm. "We're going to confront him. Privately. No lawyers, no media. Just him and me." The next day, Charles summoned Clay to his office in the towering Whitaker Construction headquarters. The atmosphere was tense, the kind of silence that made even the most seasoned businessman uncomfortable. Clay entered the room with his usual confidence, but the moment he met Charles's steely gaze, it faltered. "Charles," Clay began, his tone measured, "I understand there's been some confusion regarding the Chicago project." "Confusion?" Charles's voice was sharp, his words cutting through the air like a blade. "There's nothing confusing about the fact that your name is all over these leaked documents." Clay's expression hardened. "I don't know what you're implying, but I've always acted in the best interest of this company." "Spare me the excuses," Charles snapped. "You've put my family's legacy at risk. If you have any shred of decency left, you'll explain yourself." For a moment, Clay hesitated, as though weighing his options. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, his demeanor shifting to one of defiance. "All right, Charles," he said. "You want the truth? Here it is. I've been watching you groom James to take over this company, and frankly, I think it's a mistake. He's not ready, and you know it. I've been positioning myself to ensure that when the time comes, This company has the leadership it deserves. Charles's eyes narrowed. So, this was all about power? Undermining my son to make yourself look better. Clay smirked. You built this company on ambition, Charles. Don't act surprised when someone else shows a little. When Clay left the office, Charles sat in silence, his fury simmering beneath the surface. James entered cautiously, sensing the tension. What did he say? James asked. Charles shook his head. He admitted to everything. He's been working against us for months, trying to position himself as the next leader. James clenched his fists. Then we need to remove him from the board. He can't stay after this. Charles nodded. We will. But this isn't just about Clay. This is a wake-up call, James. If you're going to lead this company, you need to be prepared for people like him. People who will do whatever it takes to see you fail. James swallowed hard. I understand. Do you? Charles asked, his gaze piercing. Because this isn't just business. It's survival. And if you're not ready to fight for this company, then maybe Clay was right. The words hit James like a punch to the gut. He had spent his entire life trying to prove himself to his father. But now, doubt crept in like an unwelcome guest. That evening, James found himself alone in his office, staring at the Chicago expansion plans. The weight of the day's events pressed heavily on his shoulders. Andrew entered, carrying 2 glasses of whiskey. Thought you might need this, he said, setting one down in front of James. James managed a weak smile. Thanks. Andrew took a seat across from him, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. You know, for what it's worth, I think you're doing a hell of a job. James raised an eyebrow. Coming from you, that almost sounds sincere. Andrew chuckled. Don't get used to it. But seriously, Dad's tough on you because he sees himself in you. He knows you're capable. You just have to believe it. James sighed, staring into his glass. What if I can't live up to his expectations? Andrew leaned forward, his tone unusually earnest. Then you live up to your own. Stop trying to be Dad's clone. Be James Whitaker. That's more than enough. As the Whitaker family regrouped to address the fallout from Clay's betrayal, they began to realize that the challenges they faced were bigger than any single person. The cracks in their empire were growing, and the decisions they made in the coming weeks would determine whether they could hold it together or watch it crumble. The Whitaker family was reeling from Richard Clay's betrayal, but the crisis was far from over. The whispers of unethical practices in the company had gained momentum, and reporters were circling like sharks sensing blood in the water. The once unshakable Whitaker name was under scrutiny, and the stakes had never been higher. Charles Whitaker sat at the head of the sprawling dining table in the family's estate, his expression dark. Around him were his closest allies, James, Andrew, and Elizabeth. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the occasional clink of a glass or the rustle of papers. We've spent decades building this empire, Charles began, his voice low but commanding, and I will not let one man destroy it. Clay has been removed from the board, but the damage he caused is still out there. We need to act, and we need to act fast. James nodded, his jaw set. I've been reviewing the leaked documents. If we can prove Clay's actions were isolated, we might be able to restore confidence in the company. Andrew leaned back in his chair, his trademark smirk absent for once. That's a nice theory, but what happens if the press gets hold of more dirt? You know they won't stop digging. Elizabeth, ever the diplomat, placed a hand on Charles's arm. We need to control the narrative, Charles. If we stay silent, we let others define the story. Charles exhaled sharply. Then we need a plan. James, I want you to lead the charge on this. Find a way to clean up this mess. James hesitated, the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him. I'll do everything I can. Over the next few days, James dove headfirst into damage control. He worked late nights with the company's legal team, analyzing every detail of the Chicago project to identify and address potential vulnerabilities. His determination was unwavering, but the pressure was beginning to take its toll. Andrew, sensing his brother's stress, tried to lighten the mood during one late-night work session. "You know," Andrew said, lounging in a chair with his feet on the desk, "if this whole corporate dynasty thing doesn't work out, we could always open a food truck. Whitaker Waffles has a nice ring to it." James shot him a tired smile. "Appreciate the optimism, but I don't think Dad would approve." Andrew shrugged. "Who cares? Maybe it's time we stopped living in his shadow." James paused, his brother's words hitting closer to home than he cared to admit. "I can't walk away from this, Andrew. This company, it's not just Dad's legacy. It's ours." Andrew studied his brother for a moment before nodding. "Then let's make sure it's a legacy worth having." As James and Andrew worked to repair the company's reputation, Charles faced his own challenges. Investors were growing nervous, and the board was pressing for answers. Charles's reputation as an unflappable leader was being tested, and for the first time in years, cracks were beginning to show. One afternoon, during a particularly heated board meeting, Charles found himself on the defensive. "With all due respect, Charles," one board member said, "the Whitaker name isn't enough to shield us from scrutiny anymore. We need transparency, and we need it now." Charles's voice was firm, but his words carried an edge of desperation. "The situation is under control. James is addressing the issues in Chicago, and we're conducting a full internal audit. This company has weathered storms before, and will weather this one too." But as the meeting adjourned, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing his grip. For decades, he had been the unchallenged architect of the Whitaker empire. Now, the foundations he had built were beginning to crumble, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could hold them together. Meanwhile, Elizabeth began to notice the toll the situation was taking on her family. Charles was more withdrawn than ever, and James seemed to be carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Even Andrew, usually so carefree, was uncharacteristically serious. One evening, as she sat with James in the library, she decided to voice her concerns. "James," she said gently, "you've been working non-stop. When's the last time you took a moment for yourself?" James looked up from his laptop, exhaustion etched into his face. "I can't afford to slow down, Mom. There's too much at stake." Elizabeth reached out, placing a comforting hand on his. "I know you feel responsible, but you're not alone in this. Your father, Andrew, and we're all here to support you." James managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Mom. I just want to make sure I don't let anyone down." "You won't," Elizabeth said firmly. "And don't forget, this family is more than its business. Don't lose sight of what really matters." As the Whitakers navigated the fallout from the scandal, an unexpected twist emerged. A former employee from the Chicago project came forward, claiming to have evidence that could exonerate the company. The information was promising, but it came with a catch. The employee demanded a meeting with Charles himself. "It could be a trap," Andrew warned when the family discussed the offer. "For all we know, this guy's just looking for a payout." James shook his head. "It's a risk, but if he has real evidence, it could clear our name." Charles, ever the strategist, made the decision. "Set up the meeting. If there's even a chance he's telling the truth, we have to take it." The meeting was arranged at a discreet location, far from the prying eyes of the media. As Charles and James sat across from the former employee, a man named Victor Alvarez, the tension in the room was palpable. "I worked on the Chicago project for 2 years, Victor began. "I saw things that didn't add up. Documents being altered, money being funneled into suspicious accounts. I reported it, but nothing was done. That's when I realized someone high up was pulling the strings." Charles's expression was unreadable. "And you're saying that someone was Clay?" Victor nodded. "I can prove it. I kept copies of everything, emails, invoices, even meeting minutes. It's all there." James leaned forward, his voice steady. "Why come forward now?" Victor hesitated before answering. "Because I believe in what this company used to stand for. And because I know Clay doesn't care about anything but his own ambition." Charles studied Victor for a long moment before extending his hand. "If what you're saying is true, you'll be doing more than clearing our name. You'll be helping us rebuild what he tried to destroy." With Victor's evidence in hand, the Whitakers prepared for the next phase of their battle. A fight not just for their company, but for the legacy they had spent a lifetime building. With Victor Alvarez's evidence in hand, the Whitakers began piecing together the full extent of Richard Clay's betrayal. The documents painted a damning picture. Altered financial records, falsified permits, and payments routed through offshore accounts. It wasn't just a case of negligence. Clay had deliberately sabotaged the company to serve his own agenda. Charles, James, and Andrew gathered in the estate study to review the findings. The room was thick with tension as Charles examined the evidence, his jaw tightening with each passing page. "This isn't just sabotage," Charles said, his voice low and controlled. "This is a calculated attempt to take control of the company." Clay knew exactly what he was doing. James nodded, his fingers drumming on the table. "With this evidence, we can clear the company's name. But it won't be enough to undo the damage he's done." Andrew, leaning back in his chair, crossed his arms. "So what's the plan? Expose him to the press? Take him to court?" Charles's gaze sharpened. "We're not going to give him the satisfaction of dragging this out. We'll present the evidence to the board and let them decide his fate. Once he's formally removed, we'll release a statement to the public." The following day, the Whitaker board convened in a closed-door meeting. The air in the room was electric as Charles presented the evidence against Clay. The board members, many of whom had initially questioned the company's integrity, were visibly shaken by the revelations. "This is not just a betrayal of this company," Charles said, his voice steady but firm. "It's a betrayal of everything we stand for. I'm calling for an immediate vote to permanently remove Richard Clay from his position and strip him of any remaining authority within this organization." The vote was unanimous. As the meeting adjourned, James felt a flicker of relief. For the first time in weeks, it seemed like they were regaining control. That evening, the Whitakers gathered around the dining table, the mood lighter than it had been in weeks. Elizabeth raised her glass, her smile warm but tinged with exhaustion. "To the truth," she said, "and to our family, for standing together through this." James and Andrew exchanged a rare look of camaraderie, clinking their glasses with their parents. "It's not over yet," James said, "but at least we're finally moving in the right direction." Charles nodded. "This family has faced challenges before, and we've always come out stronger. That won't change now." But as the Whitakers celebrated their small victory, trouble was already brewing. The next morning, an anonymous email arrived in James's inbox. The subject line read, "What else don't you know?" The email contained a single attachment, a scanned document with a signature that froze James in his tracks. It was his own. The document appeared to approve one of the falsified permits connected to the Chicago project. James stared at the screen, his mind racing. He had no memory of signing the document, but the signature was unmistakably his. James rushed to his father's office, the document printed and trembling in his hands. "Dad, we have a problem," he said, placing the paper on Charles's desk. Charles frowned as he read the document. "Where did you get this?" "An anonymous email," James replied. "I don't remember signing this, but the signature is mine." Charles's expression darkened. "This could be a forgery. Clay might be trying to cover his tracks by implicating you." James nodded, but his stomach churned. "What if it's not a forgery? What if I signed it without realizing what I was approving?" Charles stood, placing a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "We'll figure this out. But for now, you need to stay focused. We can't let this distract us from the bigger picture." Meanwhile, Andrew, who had overheard the conversation, couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that there was more to the story. He decided to do some digging of his own, using his less conventional methods to uncover the truth. Andrew's investigation led him to an unexpected discovery: an encrypted email chain between Clay and a mid-level project manager in the Chicago office. The emails suggested that Clay had deliberately funneled documents to James's desk, knowing they would be signed in the midst of routine approvals. Classic setup, Andrew muttered under his breath. Armed with this new information, Andrew confronted James in the study. You didn't sign that document knowingly, Andrew said, tossing a printed email onto the desk. Clay set you up. He knew you'd be too busy to question it. James read the email, a mix of relief and anger washing over him. He really went to these lengths just to sabotage me? Andrew smirked. What can I say? You're a threat to people like him. The Whitakers wasted no time in using Andrew's discovery to dismantle Clay's remaining influence. Armed with the emails and Victor's testimony, they worked tirelessly to rebuild the company's reputation. But just when it seemed like they were turning the tide, another twist emerged. A former competitor of Whitaker Construction, a shrewd and ambitious developer named Evelyn Harper, reached out to Charles with a proposition. I know about the Chicago situation, Evelyn said during a tense phone call, and I also know that you're looking to expand into the West Coast market. I'm proposing a partnership, one that could benefit us both. Charles was immediately skeptical. Why would you want to partner with us? We're not exactly at the height of our reputation right now. Evelyn's tone was calm, almost amused. Because I see an opportunity. Your company has resources and expertise that I need, and I have connections that can help you recover. It's a win-win. Charles didn't trust Evelyn, but he couldn't deny the potential advantages of the partnership. As he considered the offer, he couldn't shake the feeling that it would come with strings attached. As the Whitakers faced the decision of whether to align with Evelyn Harper, the family's unity would be tested once again. Would they take the risk to secure their future, or would they stand firm in their independence? The Whitaker family gathered in the grand living room of their estate to discuss Evelyn Harper's surprising proposal. The tension in the room was palpable, the decision weighing heavily on everyone. Charles paced by the fireplace, his arms crossed. Evelyn Harper is a shrewd operator. She's never made a move that wasn't calculated to benefit her. Partnering with her could bring us new opportunities, but it could also put us at her mercy. James sat on the couch, his hands clasped together. We're still recovering from the fallout with Clay. Aligning with Evelyn might stabilize things in the short term, but at what cost? Andrew leaned against the wall, a bemused smile on his face. Honestly, I kind of like her style. She's bold, she's smart, and she knows how to get what she wants. Maybe we could learn a thing or two. Elizabeth, seated beside James, shook her head. This isn't just about business. It's about trust. Can we trust her to honor her end of the deal? Charles stopped pacing and turned to face his family. We need to meet with her. I want to hear exactly what she's proposing before we make any decisions. A meeting was arranged at Evelyn Harper's sleek penthouse in Manhattan. The space was a reflection of her personality, modern, luxurious, and intimidating. Evelyn greeted the Whitakers with a confident smile, her sharp features and piercing gaze making it clear she was in control. Charles, Evelyn said, extending a hand. Thank you for coming. I'm glad we can discuss this opportunity face to face. Charles nodded, his expression neutral. Let's get to the point, Evelyn. What exactly are you offering? Evelyn gestured for them to sit around a glass table overlooking the city skyline. Your company has been through a rough patch, but the name Whitaker still carries weight. I'm proposing a joint venture, your expertise in construction combined with my connections in the West Coast market. Together, we can dominate an untapped region. James frowned. And what do you get out of this? Evelyn's smile widened. I get access to your resources and reputation. In return, I'll provide the capital and political connections needed to make the expansion a success. It's a win-win. Charles leaned forward, his tone sharp. And if we say no? Evelyn's eyes narrowed, a flicker of amusement in her gaze. Then you're on your own to repair your reputation and fund the expansion. It'll be slower, riskier, and far less profitable. The room fell silent, the weight of Evelyn's words sinking in. After the meeting, the Whitakers returned to the estate to weigh their options. I don't trust her, Charles said bluntly. She's too polished, too confident. She wants control, and she'll do whatever it takes to get it. James nodded. But she's not wrong about the risks of going it alone. We're stretched thin as it is, and a failed expansion could set us back even further. Andrew, ever the wildcard, smirked. I think we should go for it. She's ambitious, sure, but so are we. If we play this right, we can come out ahead. Elizabeth's voice was calm but firm. If we're going to partner with Evelyn, we need safeguards in place. Contracts that protect our interests and ensure she can't overstep her bounds. Charles sighed, rubbing his temples. We'll consult the legal team and draft terms. But make no mistake, this is a gamble, and I don't like gambling with our family's future. As negotiations with Evelyn began, James found himself increasingly wary of her motives. She was charming and persuasive, but there was a cold calculation behind her every move. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was holding something back. One evening, while reviewing the draft agreement, James noticed a clause that seemed out of place. It granted Evelyn significant control over key decisions in the joint venture. More control than she had initially implied. Dad, look at this, James said, pointing out the clause. Charles's brow furrowed as he read the document. She's trying to secure veto power over our operations. If we agree to this, we'd be handing her the reins. James's jaw tightened. I knew she was too good to be true. The next day, during a tense negotiation session, Charles confronted Evelyn about the clause. This isn't what we agreed on, Charles said, his tone icy. You're asking for control over decisions that should remain ours. Evelyn didn't flinch. I'm asking for a say in decisions that affect our mutual interests. If you can't trust me as a partner, then maybe this isn't the right deal for you. Charles's eyes narrowed. Don't mistake caution for distrust. We've been burned before, and I won't let it happen again. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her smile cool. Fair enough. Let's revise the terms. As the negotiations continued, James and Andrew found themselves working together more closely than ever. Despite their differences, they shared a common goal: protecting the family legacy. I have to admit, Andrew said one night as they reviewed the latest draft. You're better at this than I expected. Maybe Dad's right about you after all. James chuckled, the tension between them easing for the first time in weeks. Don't get used to it. I'm still figuring this out as I go. Andrew raised his glass in a mock toast. Here's to figuring it out. After weeks of back and forth, the Whitakers and Evelyn finally reached an agreement. The terms were balanced, with safeguards in place to protect both parties. Despite his reservations, Charles signed the deal, knowing it was the best path forward. Evelyn's partnership brought immediate benefits. Her connections opened doors in the West Coast market, and the joint venture quickly gained momentum. But as the Whitakers celebrated their success, subtle tensions began to emerge. Evelyn's influence within the company grew, and her decisions, while profitable, often clashed with Charles's vision. The partnership that had seemed like a lifeline now felt like a power struggle waiting to erupt. As the Whitakers navigated this new chapter, they couldn't shake the feeling that their alliance with Evelyn was a ticking time bomb. Would they be able to maintain control, or had they unknowingly handed the keys to their kingdom to someone who wouldn't hesitate to take it all? The Whitaker-Evelyn Harper partnership was a roaring success on paper. The West Coast expansion thrived, revenues soared, and the media celebrated the collaboration as a business masterstroke. But behind the polished headlines, tension brewed. Charles Whitaker was a man used to absolute control, and Evelyn Harper's growing influence within the joint venture was beginning to chafe. Her decisions, while often profitable, frequently bypassed Charles's input. It wasn't long before their partnership turned into a silent tug-of-war. One morning, James entered the Whitaker construction boardroom to find his father poring over the latest financial reports. Good news, I assume? James asked, noting the numbers on the screen. Charles didn't look up. The numbers are solid, but look closer. Evelyn's pushing resources into a new residential project without consulting us. She's overstepping. James frowned. I thought we had agreements in place to prevent this. Charles's voice was tight with frustration. Agreements mean nothing if she finds ways around them. She's leveraging her connections to fast-track decisions, leaving us out of the loop. James sighed, pulling out a chair. Then we need to address it head-on. A power struggle won't do either of us any good. That afternoon, Charles called for a meeting with Evelyn at Whitaker headquarters. She arrived in her usual confident manner, dressed sharply and carrying an air of unshakable composure. "Charles, James," she said, her tone polite but firm. "What's the urgency?" Charles wasted no time. "I want to discuss your recent decisions regarding the residential project. You're reallocating resources without consulting the board or myself." Evelyn arched an eyebrow. "The project falls under the joint venture's jurisdiction, Charles. And as a partner, I have the authority to act in its best interest." "In its best interest," Charles repeated, his tone steely. "Or yours?" Evelyn's smile didn't falter. "This is business, Charles. We agreed to move quickly on opportunities, and that's exactly what I'm doing. If we stop to debate every decision, we'll lose our edge." James intervened, his voice calm but firm. "Evelyn, we're not questioning your intentions. But this partnership only works if we're aligned. We need to maintain transparency." Evelyn's gaze shifted to James, her expression softening slightly. "Fair enough. I'll ensure you're kept in the loop moving forward. But remember, success requires trust." Despite Evelyn's assurances, the unease within the Whitaker family deepened. Charles became increasingly wary of her growing influence, while James struggled to balance diplomacy with loyalty to his father. Andrew, meanwhile, watched the unfolding drama with his usual detached amusement. But even he couldn't deny that Evelyn was a force to be reckoned with. "Dad's not wrong to be cautious," Andrew said one evening as he and James discussed the situation. "But Evelyn isn't stupid. She knows we're watching her." James nodded. "Which makes her even more dangerous. If she feels threatened, she'll double down." Andrew grinned. "Then maybe we need to play her game. Keep her close. Make her think we're on her side." James frowned. "You're suggesting we manipulate her?" Andrew shrugged. "I'm suggesting we protect ourselves. Evelyn's not the type to share power willingly." As the partnership progressed, Evelyn's bold moves continued to generate profits, but they also highlighted the growing divide between her and Charles. One day, an unexpected announcement from Evelyn sent shockwaves through Whitaker Construction. She had secured a lucrative government contract for an infrastructure project in Los Angeles. The deal was a major win, but it came with a catch. Evelyn's firm would take the lead on the project, relegating Whitaker Construction to a secondary role. Charles was livid. "She's sidelining us in our own partnership," he fumed during a family meeting. "This isn't a collaboration. It's a takeover." Elizabeth, ever the peacemaker, tried to calm him. "Charles, let's not jump to conclusions. There's still time to renegotiate." But James, who had reviewed the contract, knew it wasn't that simple. "She's locked us in," he said. "If we push back too hard, we risk losing the entire deal." Andrew leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. "Or we play along for now and find a way to outmaneuver her later." As tensions escalated, James decided to confront Evelyn directly. He invited her to a private dinner, hoping to address the power struggle without his father's fiery temper clouding the discussion. Evelyn arrived at the upscale restaurant looking as composed as ever, her sharp eyes betraying nothing. "James," she said as they sat, "this feels more like a strategy session than a dinner. What's on your mind?" James chose his words carefully. "Evelyn, I respect what you've done for the partnership. Your drive and vision have brought us incredible success. But I'm concerned about the balance of power. My father feels sidelined, and that's not sustainable." Evelyn studied him for a moment before replying. "Your father is used to running the show, James. Partnerships require compromise, and he struggles with that." "It's not just about him," James countered. "This is about trust. If we can't trust each other, this partnership will implode." Evelyn's expression softened slightly. "I understand your concerns, but trust is a two-way street. If Charles wants to be more involved, he needs to meet me halfway. James nodded, though he wasn't entirely convinced. Then let's figure out how to make that happen. For everyone's sake. Back at the Whitaker estate, Charles listened as James recounted the conversation. She's not backing down, James admitted, but she's open to finding common ground, if we're willing to work with her. Charles shook his head. Evelyn Harper doesn't do common ground. She's consolidating power, and if we're not careful, she'll take everything. Andrew, who had been silently observing, finally spoke up. Then maybe it's time we stop playing defense. Let's find her weak spot and use it. Charles frowned. And what exactly do you suggest? Andrew smirked. I'll handle it. Just trust me. As Andrew set out to gather intel on Evelyn, the Whitaker family prepared for the next chapter of their battle. A fight not just for control of their company, but for the survival of their legacy. Would their efforts be enough to outmaneuver Evelyn Harper? Or had they underestimated the woman who had become both their greatest asset and their most dangerous adversary? Andrew Whitaker had always been the wild card of the family. While James and Charles focused on strategy and discipline, Andrew operated on instinct and creativity. His unconventional methods had often been a source of tension within the family, but now they were exactly what the Whitakers needed to face Evelyn Harper. Andrew's plan began with subtlety. Over the next few weeks, he quietly dug into Evelyn's background, leveraging his network of contacts to gather information. It wasn't long before he uncovered a lead, an old business deal Evelyn had made years ago, one that had ended in a publicized dispute. The fallout had been settled quietly, but whispers of the controversy still lingered. Evelyn's not as untouchable as she seems, Andrew told James one evening as they reviewed his findings. She's made enemies before, and some of them might still be out there. James frowned, uneasy with the direction this was heading. We're not going to blackmail her, Andrew. Andrew rolled his eyes. Relax. I'm not suggesting we stoop to her level. But if we understand her weaknesses, we can level the playing field. Meanwhile, Evelyn continued to press her advantage in the partnership. Her decisions were bold and effective, but they often sidelined the Whitakers in ways that fueled Charles's frustration. One afternoon, during a tense meeting at Whitaker headquarters, Evelyn announced plans to restructure the joint venture's leadership team. We need a more agile decision-making process, Evelyn said, her tone matter-of-fact. I'm proposing we streamline operations by consolidating authority under a single leadership role. Charles's jaw tightened. And I assume you're nominating yourself for that role? Evelyn smiled, unbothered by the accusation. It makes sense. I have the connections and the experience to move quickly in high-stakes situations. But I'm open to discussing alternatives. James glanced at his father, whose fury was barely contained. This feels like a significant shift in the partnership, James said carefully. Shouldn't this be a decision we make together? Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her expression calm. Of course. But let's be honest, James, leadership isn't about committees. It's about decisiveness. The proposal marked a turning point for the Whitakers. It was clear that Evelyn wasn't content with being a partner. She wanted control. That evening, Charles called a family meeting to discuss their next steps. She's trying to take the company out from under us, Charles said, pacing the room. This isn't a partnership. It's a coup. James nodded. She's pushing hard, but we still have leverage. The joint venture's contracts require mutual agreement for any major structural changes. She can't do this without our approval. Andrew smirked. So let's make her work for it. If she wants control, she'll have to give us something in return. Elizabeth, ever the voice of reason, interjected. We need to be careful. If this escalates, it could damage both the company and our family. There has to be a way to resolve this without burning everything down. As the Whitakers debated their strategy, Andrew quietly pursued his plan. Through his contacts, he arranged a meeting with one of Evelyn's former business partners, a man named Victor Delaney, who had been part of the controversial deal Andrew had uncovered. Victor, a seasoned entrepreneur with a sharp wit, didn't hold back when Andrew asked about Evelyn. She's brilliant, no question, Victor said, swirling his whiskey as they sat in a quiet bar. But she's ruthless. If she sees an opportunity, she'll take it, and she won't lose sleep over who gets hurt in the process. Andrew leaned forward. Did she cross you? Victor chuckled bitterly. Let's just say our partnership didn't end on friendly terms. But I'll give her credit. She knows how to win. Do you think she has any weaknesses? Andrew asked. Victor smirked. Everyone has weaknesses, Andrew. You just have to know where to look. Armed with Victor's insights, Andrew returned to the Whitaker estate with a clearer picture of Evelyn's tactics. She's playing a long game, Andrew told James. She's betting that we'll either fold under pressure or make a mistake she can exploit. But if we stay ahead of her, we can turn the tables. James nodded, his resolve strengthening. Then we need to make sure every move we make is deliberate. No more reactionary decisions. Charles, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. If Evelyn wants to test our strength, then we'll show her what the Whitakers are capable of. This family didn't build an empire by backing down. The Whitakers' first countermove came during the next board meeting. Charles and James presented a comprehensive plan to expand the joint venture's operations into a new market, one that would require Evelyn's cooperation but also align with the Whitakers' long-term goals. We believe this expansion will benefit both parties, James said, his tone confident. But it will require mutual trust and transparency to succeed. Evelyn studied the proposal, her expression unreadable. Interesting. But are you sure your team is prepared for the challenges this market presents? Charles met her gaze head-on. We've faced challenges before, and we've always come out stronger. The meeting ended on a cautiously optimistic note, but the Whitakers knew the battle was far from over. Evelyn had agreed to the expansion plan, but her motives remained unclear. As the Whitakers navigated this precarious partnership, they couldn't shake the feeling that Evelyn was always one step ahead. But for the first time, they felt ready to face whatever came next. The Whitaker family knew their proposal for expansion was a calculated risk. Evelyn Harper was a formidable partner and rival, but the family's united front made her next move critical. Charles Whitaker had decided they wouldn't just play defense anymore. The Whitakers were going on the offensive. The joint venture's new project in the Pacific Northwest was ambitious. The market was challenging, requiring innovative designs and impeccable execution. It was exactly the kind of opportunity Charles believed could restore the Whitaker family's dominance and remind Evelyn who was really in charge. James was put at the forefront of the project, tasked with managing the partnership's resources and ensuring every aspect of the plan aligned with the family's vision. But even as he threw himself into the work, James couldn't ignore Evelyn's subtle attempts to undermine him. She's been redirecting resources to her own team, James told his father during a late-night meeting in the Whitaker estate study. It's slowing us down. Charles frowned, his frustration evident. She's testing us. She wants to see if we'll push back. James leaned forward, his voice firm. Then we push back. Meanwhile, Andrew continued his own efforts to level the playing field. Through his contacts, he gathered intel on Evelyn's growing influence within the joint venture. One evening, he presented his findings to the family. She's been leveraging her political connections to gain favor in the Pacific Northwest, Andrew explained, pointing to a series of key players Evelyn had met with in recent weeks. If we're going to keep up, we need to strengthen our own alliances. Elizabeth, seated beside Charles, nodded thoughtfully. We've built this company on relationships. It's time to remind our partners why they trusted us in the first place. The Whitakers set to work rebuilding their network, reaching out to longtime allies and forging new connections. Charles personally met with influential developers and city officials, emphasizing the Whitaker family's commitment to integrity and innovation. James, meanwhile, focused on ensuring the Pacific Northwest project ran smoothly. His leadership impressed not only his team but also some of Evelyn's key allies, who began questioning her aggressive tactics. But Evelyn wasn't one to back down. She called a private meeting with James, her tone sharp but composed. "You've been making moves?" Evelyn said, folding her arms. Strengthening alliances, building goodwill. I have to admit, it's impressive. James met her gaze evenly. We're just doing what's best for the partnership. Evelyn's lips curved into a faint smile. Is that so? Or are you positioning yourself to take control? James leaned back, his expression calm. Maybe both. You've made it clear this is a power struggle, Evelyn. Don't be surprised when we push back. For a moment, Evelyn's facade cracked, revealing a flicker of respect. Fair enough, James. Let's see who comes out on top. As the Pacific Northwest project progressed, tensions between the Whitakers and Evelyn reached a boiling point. Evelyn's team proposed a major change to the project's design, one that would shift the focus away from the Whitakers' original vision. This isn't what we agreed on, Charles said during a heated meeting with Evelyn and her team. You're undermining the integrity of the project. Evelyn's tone was cool. I'm adapting to the realities of the market. Flexibility is key to success. James stood his ground. Flexibility doesn't mean abandoning the principles that made this partnership work. We're not signing off on these changes. The standoff left the project temporarily stalled, but it also sent a clear message. The Whitakers weren't afraid to fight for what they believed in. In the midst of the turmoil, Andrew uncovered a critical piece of information. One of Evelyn's key allies in the Pacific Northwest had ties to a competing developer, an arrangement that posed a clear conflict of interest. This is it, Andrew told James and Charles during a late-night strategy session. If we expose this, it'll damage her credibility and strengthen our position. Charles hesitated, his expression serious. We need to be careful. If this backfires, it could hurt the partnership and the project. James nodded. We'll present the information strategically. Let her know we're aware of the conflict without going public. It'll force her to back off. The next day, James confronted Evelyn with the evidence during a private meeting. Interesting connections you've made in the Pacific Northwest, James said, sliding the documents across the table. I'm sure the board would have some questions about this. Evelyn's eyes narrowed as she examined the papers. You've done your homework. James's tone was firm but measured. This partnership only works if we're honest with each other. If you want it to continue, you'll need to rethink your approach. For a moment, Evelyn said nothing. Then, to James's surprise, she nodded. I underestimated you, James. You're sharper than I gave you credit for. The confrontation marked a turning point in the partnership. Evelyn began to pull back, allowing the Whitakers more control over the project. The Pacific Northwest expansion moved forward, and the Whitaker name regained some of its lost luster. But James knew the battle was far from over. Evelyn Harper was still a formidable rival, and the lessons he had learned during their power struggle would shape the future of the Whitaker family. The Pacific Northwest expansion was finally back on track. The Whitakers, reinvigorated by their small but significant victory over Evelyn Harper, worked tirelessly to ensure the project's success. Charles Whitaker, though still wary of Evelyn's intentions, had regained confidence in his family's ability to hold their ground. James, now fully immersed in his leadership role, found a new rhythm. The challenges he faced had sharpened his instincts and deepened his understanding of the business. He wasn't just Charles Whitaker's heir anymore. He was proving himself as a leader in his own right. Evelyn, for her part, had retreated from her more aggressive tactics. The documents James presented had forced her to reevaluate her approach, and while she remained ambitious, she respected the Whitakers' resolve. During a joint board meeting to discuss the project's progress, she even extended an olive branch. You've proven yourself, James, Evelyn said, her tone sincere. I underestimated your determination and leadership. Perhaps this partnership still has potential after all. James nodded, his voice calm but firm. The Whitakers are committed to making this partnership work, Evelyn. But we won't compromise our values or our vision to do so. Evelyn's lips curved into a faint smile. Fair enough. Let's see where this takes us. As the project neared completion, the Whitaker family took a rare moment to reflect on their journey. One evening, they gathered in the estate's sunroom, the soft glow of the setting sun casting warm light across the room. Elizabeth, seated beside Charles, spoke first. It's been a difficult few months, but I'm proud of how this family has come together. We've faced challenges before, but this felt different. It wasn't just about the company, it was about us. Charles nodded, his expression thoughtful. This family has always been the heart of Whitaker construction. Without that, the company is just buildings and numbers. You've all reminded me of that. James, leaning against the window frame, smiled faintly. It wasn't easy, but I think we've come out stronger. And I've learned a lot. Not just about the business, but about myself. Andrew grinned, raising his glass. Who would have thought James would turn into the star of the show? Don't get too comfortable, though. I'm still the fun one. Laughter filled the room, easing the tension that had lingered for so long. The project launch was a resounding success. The Pacific Northwest expansion brought in record profits, and the Whitaker name was once again associated with innovation and integrity. Reporters praised the family's resilience, while industry leaders marveled at their ability to navigate the challenges of a high-stakes partnership. Evelyn Harper, though still a formidable figure, had taken a step back. The power struggle between her and the Whitakers had ended in a tenuous truce, one built on mutual respect rather than dominance. In the weeks that followed, James found himself reflecting on the journey. He had started as a man trying to live up to his father's expectations, but he had emerged as someone capable of defining his own path. One afternoon, as he stood on the balcony of the Whitaker headquarters, Charles joined him. "You've done well, James," Charles said, his voice quiet but sincere. James glanced at his father, surprised by the rare compliment. "Thank you, Dad. That means a lot." Charles placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You've shown me that you're ready, not just to lead this company, but to carry on the legacy. I couldn't be prouder." For the first time in years, James felt the weight of his father's expectations lift. It wasn't about living up to someone else's vision anymore. It was about forging his own. As the Whitakers moved forward, they knew the challenges of running an empire would never end. But they also knew that, together, they could face anything. The lessons they had learned, about trust, resilience, and the power of family, would guide them through whatever lay ahead. The Whitaker family had come full circle, emerging from their trials stronger, more united, and with a renewed sense of purpose. The Pacific Northwest expansion marked a turning point, not only for the company but also for their relationships. For the first time in years, they could focus on what truly mattered, their bond as a family. One sunny morning, James found himself walking through the company's headquarters, now bustling with new projects and fresh energy. The atmosphere had shifted from tense and uncertain to vibrant and full of possibility. His colleagues greeted him with respect, no longer seeing him as just Charles's son, but as a capable leader in his own right. Stopping by the floor-to-ceiling window in the executive wing, James stared out at the cityscape. The skyline was a reminder of everything his family had built, a testament to their hard work and resilience. Andrew joined him, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Deep in thought, huh?" he said, handing one to James. James chuckled, taking the coffee. "Just thinking about how far we've come. Feels like we've been through a war." Andrew smirked. "We kind of have. But hey, look at us, still standing. And I'd say we're better for it." James nodded, his expression softening. "I couldn't have done it without you. You helped in ways I didn't expect." Andrew grinned. "Don't get mushy on me, bro. I'm just glad I got to play hero for once." Meanwhile, at the Whitaker estate, Charles and Elizabeth shared a rare moment of quiet. Seated in the sunroom, they reflected on the challenges they had faced and the lessons they had learned. "Do you remember when we started this company?" Charles asked, a hint of nostalgia in his voice. Elizabeth smiled. "Of course. You were so determined, so certain that we could build something lasting. And we did." Charles nodded, his expression contemplative. "But it wasn't just about the buildings or the profits. It was about creating something for our family, something they could carry forward. I lost sight of that for a while. Elizabeth reached out, taking his hand. But you found your way back. And so did they. James, Andrew. They've both shown us what this family is capable of. Charles's gaze softened. They've exceeded my expectations. I'm proud of them. Of all of us. As the weeks turned into months, the Whitakers continued to rebuild their lives and their company. Evelyn Harper remained a presence in the joint venture, but the balance of power had shifted. Her respect for the Whitakers was genuine, and the partnership evolved into one of mutual trust, albeit with occasional sparks of rivalry. One evening, during a celebratory dinner at a high-profile event, Evelyn approached James. "You've surprised me," she said, raising a glass. "Most people crumble under pressure, but you thrived. That's rare." James smiled, his tone light but confident. "I had a good teacher and a strong family. We don't crumble easily." Evelyn's eyes sparkled with amusement. "Let's hope that strength lasts. You'll need it in this business." Back at the estate, the family gathered for a rare evening without business discussions or strategic planning. They laughed, reminisced, and shared stories about their journey. Andrew, as usual, provided the humor. "Remember when I told you we should start a food truck? Whitaker waffles is still a solid idea." James rolled his eyes. "Don't tempt me. After everything we've been through, a simpler life doesn't sound so bad." Elizabeth laughed, her warm presence tying the family together. "Whatever you do, just remember what matters most. Us." Charles raised his glass, his voice steady and heartfelt. "To family, and to the future we've built together." As the night wore on, James stepped outside to the balcony, the cool evening air refreshing against his skin. Andrew joined him, leaning on the railing. "So," Andrew said, glancing at his brother, "what's next for James Whitaker, future CEO and empire builder?" James smiled, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I think I'll just take it one day at a time. For the first time in a while, that feels like enough." The Whitakers stood on the edge of a new chapter in their family's story. The lessons they had learned about trust, resilience, and the importance of unity shaped not only their future as a company but also as a family. The struggles of the past year had tested them in ways they never anticipated, but they had emerged stronger and more determined than ever. One crisp autumn morning, James walked through the bustling offices of Whitaker Construction. The team was gearing up for another ambitious project, a sustainable urban development initiative that would redefine the family's legacy. It was a bold step forward, one that reflected the Whitakers' renewed commitment to innovation and integrity. James stopped at a cluster of desks where a team of young architects were sketching designs. He admired their enthusiasm and fresh ideas, reminded of how far he had come since his first days in the company. "Looking good," he said, offering them a nod of encouragement. "Let me know if there's anything you need." As he walked away, he couldn't help but smile. The company was thriving, and for the first time, James felt completely at home in his role. Back at the Whitaker estate, Charles sat in his study, reviewing plans for the new initiative. Elizabeth entered, carrying a tray of coffee, her presence as calming as ever. "You seem deep in thought," she said, setting the tray down. Charles glanced up, a rare smile softening his features. "Just thinking about how far we've come. This new project, it's more than I ever imagined when I started this company." Elizabeth sat beside him, her hand resting on his. "And it's because of what you built. Not just the company, but this family. You should be proud." Charles nodded, his gaze distant. "I am. And I think it's time I step back and let James take the lead." "He's ready." Elizabeth smiled warmly. "He'll make you proud. He already has." That evening, the Whitakers gathered for dinner in the estate's grand dining room. It was a rare moment of togetherness, free from the pressures of business and boardrooms. Charles raised a glass, his voice steady and filled with emotion. "This family has faced its share of challenges, but we've come through stronger. I couldn't be prouder of what we've accomplished. Together." James, seated beside him, added, "We wouldn't be here without you, Dad. You've built something incredible. and it's an honor to carry it forward." Andrew grinned, raising his glass. "To the Whitakers, and to me, for keeping things interesting." Laughter filled the room, the sound carrying a warmth that had been absent for far too long. As the months passed, the Whitakers embraced their new roles and responsibilities. Charles officially stepped back from day-to-day operations, focusing on mentorship and legacy building. James took over as CEO, leading the company with a vision that balanced tradition with innovation. Andrew, true to form, found his own niche within the company, developing creative initiatives that brought fresh energy to their projects. His unorthodox ideas often sparked debates, but they also pushed the company to think outside the box. Elizabeth continued to be the glue that held the family together, her quiet strength and wisdom guiding them through every twist and turn. On a bright spring morning, the Whitakers gathered at the groundbreaking ceremony for their latest project. The event was a celebration of everything they had achieved and the bright future ahead. James stood at the podium, addressing the crowd of employees, partners, and community members. "This project represents more than just a new development," he said. "It's a testament to what we can accomplish when we work together." The Whitaker name has always been about building communities, building opportunities, and building a legacy we can all be proud of. And today, we take another step forward in that journey. The applause was thunderous, but for James, the most meaningful moment came when he stepped down from the podium and saw his family standing together. Charles clapped a hand on his shoulder, his expression filled with pride. "You've done well, James. Better than I ever imagined." James smiled. "I learned from the best." As the Whitakers looked out over the site of their new project, the sun casting a golden glow over the horizon, they felt a sense of peace and purpose. The challenges they had faced had tested them, but they had come out stronger, ready to embrace whatever the future held. The Whitaker legacy was no longer just about buildings or profits. It was about family, resilience, and the unshakable belief that together, they could overcome anything. And as they stood side by side, they knew that this was just the beginning of a new and brighter chapter. The end.